You are listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Chris, and today we will talk about one of the most maligned, yet award-winning genres in all of cinema, biopics. Are they just lazy, by-the-number ways of getting actors to imitate real people and boost their Academy Award chances? Or for those lower stakes efforts that pop up on streamers and TV, just cheap cash grabs slapped together like Netflix documentaries, hoping to draw attention from history's fairly notorious character gallery? How many biopics are actually great, exciting, fresh, if that's possible, for biographies to be at all? There's clearly a ton of highly respected biopics throughout history, though. From Raging Bull to the absolute splash Oppenheimer made just a couple of years ago. Some would even label Citizen Kane as one, though that's a bit more questionable, shall we say. But regardless, maybe the complainers are just a loud minority, and biopics are actually one of the strongest and most exciting genres out there. Let's find out where our panel stands on that. As today I'm joined by my two absolutely fabulous co-hosts, Arthur and Saul, to break down the good, the bad, and the ugly of biopics. So let's jump to the first question right out of the gate, going back to the title of this episode and finding out exactly where we all stand. Starting with you, Arthur. Do biopics generally bore you?
I'd say they would, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's because of the biopic itself. I just think it's a safer genre to win awards. And because it's so safe, it's something that you can follow a formula right down to the point. Even down to the very specific lines, such as saying, oh, you have to follow here, and then point to their heart, or down to showing the death of a family member. Because of this, like, the more normal audiences will be inspired or have their heartstrings pulled, which is guaranteed awards at that point. And I think that's what I find frustrating, because a lot of them also tend to have a very similar middle ground filmmaking style that frankly just bores me.
I think I shared some of those thoughts as well, Arthur. What about you, Saul? The biopics generally bore you, or are you one of the fans that love to champion them ahead of Oscar season?
Hi, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'd say that biopics are one of the most boring genres out there, if not the most boring. Probably tied with history as the most boring genre. For me, it's nothing to do with being Oscar baity or trying to win awards. It's all about the fact that if you're telling a true life story or the story of a person, all that you're limited to is the facts that are there, with a few exceptions, which I will bring up in the episode. But generally, biopics are boring because they just retell history and they don't really give you much more than what you can learn from reading a Wikipedia page. So in general, biopics do not make very dynamic films. They don't really tell stuff beyond what's already known, and therefore they're just boring because they're sort of limited to facts in general.
Well, first of all, I think both of you actually answered my next question as well, which is what is that puts you off biopics so much? I was going to question all of the haters, and I had a separate question picked out for any fans if there were some in the house, but it doesn't really sound like there is. Though I appear to be the most biography-friendly person on the podcast today, then, because I wouldn't say that biographies generally bore me. I would say that there's a very high chance they will. I think I fully agree with what Arthur is saying there, that a lot of them really just feel like the same, and there is clearly a formula that's been set up at this point where there is a checklist. They want to go from childhood to old age/death. Sometimes the person is still alive as well, though, so they just kind of like have to leave it the middle of the road. But it can feel very, very bland. At the same time, though, I do think that biographies do have a couple of potential strengths, such as being able to dive into the psychology of often unconventional people. of course, as I mentioned in my intro, giving actors a lot of space to shape out really, really amazing performances. So, I mean, it's not uncommon for me to find a biography just good or forgettable, but think the performances are spectacular as well. But while we are on that topic, I mean, I went through the films that are classified as biographies on IMDb. I love a ton of them, and we all did. We all looked at the list separately, and we had a little bit of the talk about it ahead of the podcast as well. We were just like scratching our heads, so saying like, why is this here? Why is this here? Why is this here? So I'd love to just hear, before we start trashing all biopics, and some of our listeners here are shouting out like, hey, this is fantastic, this is fantastic. We might not even agree what biopics actually are. So going back to you again, Arthur, how would you define a biographical movie?
It would definitely have to be going through the life of them, but in addition, I agree with you that they have to cover the psychology and what inspired them to do their works. Because let's face it, most of them are athletes or artists because that is the safe approach. I feel like what that does is it shows them what inspired them as a person to be able to do their works, with also their motivations being a factor.
And what about you, Saul? How would you define a biopic?
Before getting into my definition, I'll probably just want to disagree with you slightly, Chris, about biography performances. I think biographies probably have the largest number of excessively acclaimed, or if you like, overrated performances. A lot of the performances that get acclaimed from biographical films are acclaimed because the actor or the actress looks a lot like the person, or they've captured their mannerisms. But there's a lot more to performance rather than just mimicking what somebody looks like or how somebody acts. So I do have to part ways with you there. In terms of what makes a biopic, for me, I'd say a biopic needs to spend a significant amount of time with an individual. Looking at a few of the films that are bafflingly cited as being biographies on IMDb, a lot of those are films where spending a few weeks with the character, maybe even a few days, some of them a few months with the characters, maybe a year. I'd say you probably want at least a few years. Maybe not necessarily all the way from childhood or not all the way from birth up until old age, but I'd say a significant amount of time. You want to be spending quite a few years with them and seeing how they progress over their life cycle. I think spending even 2 years, I think, is really on the low side. I'd probably say have to spend at least a couple of years with the character to really see how they progress. Spending a few weeks with the character does not make it a biopic, even if it's based on a real life person.
That's an interesting distinction to make. Yeah, I think a lot of biographies do, or films labeled as biographies, do just focus in on a few months or a year in terms of just like a special moment in that person's life. I mean, the first one that came to mind for some reason is Abe Lincoln in Illinois, which is probably not the most mainstream. There's probably way more mainstream movies than that to point to in terms of just spending a short amount of time with the character. But yeah, I think I have a slight disagreement on it. I don't really mind the time period. I mean, I guess a couple of days is a bit too short to really properly fit the category of biopic. But like my main criteria over there would be focusing on one specific person, and they carry that through line. Like they want to find out something about that person, or they want to explore that person's life or psyche to an extent. I think that at the point when you introduce multiple different real characters with vantage points, or it's about one person's specific actions in a very important event, I would probably say they're more historical films rather than biographies, because then it's not really focused on the person. It's a bit like how you would separate like a character-driven story from a narrative-driven story in a way. Like if it's about the event, I don't think it's then really a biopic. Like if it's about someone's participation in a war campaign specifically, and the focus is on the war campaign, it's not necessarily a biopic. So my main definition would just be it's specifically about the person and it's character oriented.
I could just butt in with something quite amusing. One of the movie websites I use is Rate Your Music, which is kind of funny considering the name of the website. They actually consider Dreyer's The Passion of Joan of Arc as a biopic, which is literally like, 1 day maybe 2.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think we all kind of at least semi-agree that for it to be a biopic, it has to have a little bit more weight to its bone. Like it has to have some biography there rather than showing a specific, very, very specific moment. I guess that's one thing we can all come together around. And I guess my disagreement with Saul won't be too heated either, because in terms of acting performances, I will actually at least partially agree there that just mimicking someone or looking like someone or getting prosthetics, etc., which a lot of actors do. And in some cases, there's like, oh my God, they're brave, etc., or for looking a different way. That's not, the cornerstone, the most important thing about acting. So, while I do think that, being able to disappear into a real person and for people to see that real person, that's a great skill to have. And a ways for actors to stand out. I think that just the mimicry itself is not enough.
I've just done a little bit of research and I found a biopic or a film that's currently listed as being a biography on IMDb, which is Dog Day Afternoon, which, as the title suggests, is set over one afternoon. So I think that's a great stretch to say that Dog Day Afternoon is actually a biopic.
I mean, not just because it's set over one day. I mean, I don't even remember if they used the real names of the people involved. I mean, it's obviously based on a real event. I have to double check that. But in that movie, I mean, it's not like there's one singular main focus. Obviously, Al Pacino has center stage, but I mean, a lot of people walk away thinking about John Cazale after that film, for instance. It's an assembly, and it's about a very specific event as well. I mean, in this case, this would be true crime in my eyes almost, or like history. It wouldn't be like classifying that as a biography. Just feels ridiculous. So I guess we're definitely finding some consensus there. And with that out of the way, then I guess we kind of started to narrow down what specifically bore us, because I don't think a lot of people would say that Dog Day Afternoon is boring. And there's something else that bores us here, and it seems to be very, very much tied to a kind of very well-trodden, almost lazy narrative or way that biopics present themselves. So what are those things that makes biopics so damn boring to you?
I think I've already answered this earlier on, but the main thing that gets to be about biopics is that they just set out to recreate historical events, either well-known events or events that could be found out online with a little bit of research. It's not actually putting anything new out there into the ether. It's not creating new stories. It's just recycling what's already done. And there are a few exceptions. There's a few films that are classified as biopics that do interesting things and show perspectives on history beyond what you'd get from reading a Wikipedia page. But most biopics don't. Most biopics are there to show off what people know. And I think they're designed as like comfort food for a lot of people who maybe grew up with certain figures as part of their childhood, or when they were younger, they knew these historical figures. Sort of seeing films about them sort of gives them a little bit of comfort, even if it doesn't actually do anything new with it. An amazing example of that would be A Complete Unknown, which is one of the, I guess, laziest is a great word, one of the laziest films to get a Best Picture nomination in the past few years. It's just there's just nothing really to the film other than the fact that it depicts part of Dylan's life that's been covered extensively elsewhere already. So yeah, they don't do anything more than recycle what's already known.
Oof, that's quite a few shots fired against A Complete Unknown. But leaving that movie aside for just a second, I think you hit on something really, really important there, Sol, which is the comfort food element here. As I mentioned earlier, the biopics that speak out the most to me are either the ones that go into like a really complex character, explore their motivations, just create really compelling character drama. But most documentaries don't really do that. Most documentaries take people from pop culture, essentially, and gather together a few points about their lives and make a very conventional movie about them. And we often don't get any insights into them at all. I mean, you mentioned A Complete Unknown, and I think you can watch A Complete Unknown, and after that, Dylan is still a complete unknown to you. You can get nothing from that movie in terms of who exactly he was or is, except perhaps a bit lost and not the best boyfriend. Those are probably the things you might walk away from after that movie. I mean, personally, I actually thought it was inventive. To just disagree with you a little bit there, Sol. I think that, yes, the plotting there is really bland, but I think that the way the film is structured is very, very unique in the sense that it's almost entirely music. So you could say that that's lazy as well, that it didn't really care about writing the film, but almost all of the film is centered around the songs and Dylan's musical progression. There could have been more things done there to show why he progressed and changed. That's still a huge question mark to me. But I thought that was a really, really different mode, at least, to most hyper conventional biopics.
Just mention, in case we decide not to edit it out, you have said documentary quite a few times, Chris, rather than biopic. And I think documentaries are a lot more dynamic than a biography because you've got that intentional perspective which is going on there rather than just a retelling or recreation of events. You've got that extra added perspective.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I mix up biopics and documentaries a little bit when I think about them, just because I actually disagree with you a little bit about that too. I think most documentaries have the same issue as most biopics in that they are lazy comfort food. They just get together a Wikipedia article. Sometimes, like a documentary at least gets a few people talking, but usually just talking heads providing very little of value again beyond what you might read from past interviews as well. So yeah, I just find that documentaries and biopics, they go very closely together a lot of the time. Obviously, a lot of biopics are docudramas. A lot of documentaries includes some docudrama as well. There's an overlap there for sure, but I think that majority of films in both genres, if you want to call them that, if you want to call documentaries a genre, about real people, they fall into the same traps. The same trap of just being what you called them earlier, comfort food, just lazily assembled comfort food. What about you, Arthur, to circle back? And then you feel free to comment on A Complete Unknown as well. What are some of the things that make biographies so damn dull to you?
Unfortunately, I didn't watch Complete Unknown, so I can't comment on that. I believe that if you're going to focus on a human being, you have to look past what you're all saying as a Wikipedia article, because if we talk about the work they're making, it rarely goes into the psyche of the person. You kind of have to explore the psychological aspect of the human being, which in the first place is what makes dramas amazing to watch. Aside from a few biopics that explore that, which we'll mention later on, they hardly explore that.
Yeah, I think we all agree there, Arthur, that most biopics just doesn't go there, sadly. But then again, do most character-oriented films go there as well? I mean, probably more, to be honest. Probably more, because if they're not based on real people, real person, they might have to just work a little bit harder. They don't have that brand element, if we can call real people brands. I mean, it's almost like being part of a franchise or rebooting Spider-Man, I guess. Like, here comes the next Churchill movie, or here comes the next Bob Dylan biopic. It's a similar production mill, I suppose. To go back to the IMDb overview of biopics that I mentioned earlier, and we've all looked at biopics, the way they categorize biopics, and yep, I think we all agree that it's way off as well, but I was surprised by just how many I had rated highly on that list. So when I sorted them by my rating, and maybe we can flip it around and be a bit more positive, but by what IMDb categorizes as biopics, I've seen 567, and I've actually favorited 53 of those. So that's almost 10% of the biopics I've seen being favorites of mine. How many, like, I know you guys have that overview list open as well. I mean, how many of the biopics you've seen would you consider great or as favorites?
It looks like for me I gave around 30 of them an 8 out of 10 or higher. But looking at it, some are obviously inappropriately tagged, like The Color of Pomegranates or Siddheshwari, which are way too experimental and symbolic to be a biopic. The three of them that I gave a 10 out of 10 to, which one of them is Joan of Arc, which I know isn't biopic, there's The Grey Fox and The Straight Story, which again, I think are debatable whether or not they count.
Yeah, wow, of course, a straight story based on a true story. I would say that's based on a true story more than a biopic. Again, like it's a specific event in a person's life, mainly focused on just the bizarre nature of the quest. What about you, Sol? How many of those biopics do you love?
Yeah, this is a really hard one to answer because of the 538 biography films that I've seen according to IMDb, there's probably less than 10% of them that I'd say would actually be proper biography films. My IMDb ratings aren't really up to date because there's a lot of films when I've rewatched them, I just haven't bothered upping the rating because IMDb is a defunct site and everybody's on Letterboxd these days. But just in terms of films that are listed as biographies that I thought would be really good, I think ones that actually be genuine biographies, it's quite limited. I'd say for creativity, I do want to say that Matthew Rankin's The 20th Century's going to have to rank high up there as a biopic of a Canadian Prime Minister. That's really out there and interesting. I would also put out Weird, the Yao Ankovich story. That's a really cool and a really original take on what to do with a biopic. But beyond that, I've only got Ed Wood, which I guess you could say is a biopic because it is spending, I don't know, about 6 years with him. So it's spending a few years, but I don't know if I would say that's enough to call it a biopic. And The Favourites listed as a biopic also on IMDb, but I don't know if that really has spent enough time with them. So in terms of films that are listed as biopics, I'd say would really count as biopics. I'd say maybe just The Wolf of Wall Street might be the only biopic which I consider to genuinely be great because stuff like Amadeus I don't think really counts that you're seeing like Mo through Salieri's eyes. Schindler's List doesn't count. It's not really about Schindler. It's half about Amon Goeth and then it's about stuff beyond them. Quiz Show, the Robert Redford film is an amazing film, but that's not a biopic. So I'm going to say, yeah, maybe it's just The Wolf of Wall Street. Maybe there's been no other good biographical films ever made.
Oh, wow, just The Wolf of Wall Street. I really wouldn't even consider like Wolf of Wall Street a full-on. I mean, I guess it is but it is a biopic. It fits the criteria, I would say, because it does follow his life. But that's just such an explosive, wild ride. And yeah, going through this list, I mean, for me, I'm seeing a ton of documentary movies. Like I'm seeing Crumb and The King of Kong for some reason under the list of biopics. It's ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. So yeah, no, I mean, go through this list now myself. Like, yes, there's quite a few of these that I consider great, but yeah, like Aguirre is there, Mirror from Tarkovsky is there. Like, yes, that's an autobiography of sorts, but also fictionalized. Raging Bull, it's a 10 out of 10 for me. I mean, that's based on a real person. It follows his journey to a large point. So I'd probably say Raging Bull, great biopic. And that's a conventional biopic in terms of shaking off some points as well. So I'd put that in there for sure. Ooh, I see Saul saying Raging Bull isn't that good though. Oof.
Maybe at some stage we should do a Raging Bull versus Wolf of Wall Street episode because, yeah, Raging Bull's always been the one Martin Scorsese film that I've never really gotten.
Fair enough, yeah. I mean, I will say, my next question. Actually, I need to ask Arthur first about this, and then I'll go into other stuff. But yeah, I mean, I do see there's lots of more creative biopics here. I love too, like A Hidden Life from Terrence Malick, Mahler by Ken Russell. There are some genuinely great, more creative and bizarre and out there films that definitely fit the list. Like 20th Century as well, like you said. Von Söderberg's Carl May biopic, which is just absolutely bonkers as well. That's a masterpiece to me. But again, we're talking about all-out surrealism, so does it count? I mean, even some Yoshida films like Coup d'etat and Aerospace Massacre are counted as biopics. I mean, Aerospace Massacre has like a section in it, which is about a real person, but the rest is entirely fictionalized, and it's just a huge, huge epic. So again, what are these films doing on this list? But back to you, Arthur. So let's be clear. I mean, I actually answered a little bit, but are there any films at all on the list of films categorized by IMDb as biopics that you would consider a biopic and that you genuinely love?
I would say The Apprentice was one that was well done because it showed how society is what shaped him to be the man he is today, instead of the surface level way that every other film would tend to do. I guess I would count Paul Schrader's Mishima. It is kind of out there because half of it is just adaptations of his work, but I feel like seeing both his work alongside his life was a good way of showing how he is as a person, and it explored quite a few years as well. I would say, like everybody else here, The Wolf of Wall Street, which was just so entertaining, and I did like how it just had so much disdain for everyone. Maybe Public Enemies might count, but it was more about Michael Mann's borderline experimental digital filmmaking style that made it stand out for me. There is one that fits the formula quite well but still does enough to stand out, which is Better Man, which is a Robbie Williams biopic where he's a CGI monkey. There is a lot more to it than the CGI monkey part, despite it following the stuff that is bad for biopics. Like I mentioned, the scene of like saying, oh, you must believe in yourself, and then touching his heart and saying he should focus on there. But what made it special is that he's actually directly in the film doing the voiceover narration, and he just straight up says, hey, I'm an awful person and I know that, and just says all the flaws about himself. And because of that, it explored the psychology quite well. There is Ed Wood, which we said is on the border. I believe that would be it, because looking at everything else, I wouldn't really call them biopics. Well, I guess there's Peter Watkins, Edvard Munch, if you want to go really avant-garde.
It sounds like, I mean, I know Saul isn't usually that into avant-garde, but it sounds like all of us are kind of like saying for biopics to be great, like they have to be something like 20th century or something like that, which is pretty amazing that we're coming to that kind of conclusion. I kept going through the list here, and I am seeing some more films that would fit. I think one film that I do consider a masterpiece is The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. Now the question is that a proper biopic, or is that a specific event? And obviously it's a dual biopic in a way too, because you see Jesse James through the eyes of Robert Ford to a large extent, and it's a very, very different kind of narrative. Oh, and Andrei Rublev kind of counts as well, you know. It's so damn difficult. I mean, I do actually, though, and probably this is where I'm gonna stand out a bit from you guys. I actually think that biopics from classic Hollywood tend to be quite interesting, more so than a lot of the dramas from Hollywood from that period. Not necessarily that they're better than other dramas, obviously there's a ton of great dramas from classic Hollywood, but they would sometimes manage to get away with some things that, especially during the Hays Code and things like that, where characters had to be written a certain way. Obviously, there were rewrites and fictionalizations and things like that, but you could get types of characters and types of narratives that you wouldn't get in a standard Hollywood film in classic Hollywood biopics, just because they had to, at least to some extent, follow a real person. And then suddenly, it wasn't that super familiar narrative anymore. It was something a little bit different because they had to make those checkpoints. One that was not during the Hays Code, was before that, but which I actually do love. It's because I actually think it's darkly comedic. It's The Private Life of Henry VIII, which takes us through Henry VIII's marriages with almost like a lot of dark comedy. Charles playing him phenomenally well as like a heel, like just absolute asshole and a pompous ass, and with just a huge disconnect from the people he's murdering as well. I thought that was really interesting. Generally, I think there's a lot of really, really good, like just high quality classic Hollywood biopics as well, like Life of Emilio Zola, for instance, as well. But they don't; those films don't hit masterpiece status for me. They're just films I really, really enjoyed.
I guess since we were talking about the highlights, I could talk about the worst ones. I did the embarrassing thing, or well, not really embarrassing, but more like ironically following Lights Camera Jackson on Twitter. And when he posted his top 10 of the year, he had a film called Dance First, which is a Samuel Beckett biopic. It's a by the book and Oscar Bates sort of biopic, but it's done so poorly that it actually has a rotten score on Rotten Tomatoes, which says enough for Oscar bait. It's honestly so bad that it might be meta in the way, because in the beginning they do his psychological aspect, where as he's winning his Nobel Prize, he climbs up a ladder on the stage, goes into a sort of brutalist environment, and he meets himself. And the only biopic part is that they talk to each other about the relevant people in the film, so it ends up just being literally the personal life section of a Wikipedia article. They never even discuss his work, they just say, oh, his book's done, and that's it. So I feel like it might be meta because in a work like Waiting for Godot, they just kind of wait for the third person to appear or, for anything to happen and nothing does. And I kind of feel like the film was accomplishing that in a way. So it's either the dumbest biopic or the best because of that.
Whew. I mean, I hadn't even heard of that movie, to be honest. I'm glad I don't follow. I'm not going to say anything bad about Lights Camera Jackson. People can have whatever taste they have. But wow. Okay. All right. That sounds like it almost could be a movie worth watching just for the experience of watching the movie. I mean, I had a question on my list here, which was out of all of the films, all of the biopics that you actually loved, are there any similarities? But we already said that. They're either focusing on something interesting about the character, something unique, or they're avant-garde. Like there seems to be almost nothing else except for my slight preference for classic Hollywood biopics. So it seems like this episode is almost running out an end because you guys just don't like almost any biopic ever made. It feels really got more defenders there. Wow, but it fits the episode title that biopics bore us, and it seems most do, and those that don't, we don't call biopics. It's a nice bit of circular argument there. I was going to try to swing it around to something more positive, and I guess two last-ditch effort to get something more positive from you guys. So let me go with attempt one. Can you think of any strengths or advantages whatsoever that biopics have over other genres?
Conventional biopics? I think I have nothing. Unconventional biopics? Yes. So I guess something like Ed Wood, where Tim Burton fashions it in the style of a 50s sci-fi movie with luscious black and white and everything. I think, yes, there's an advantage there. Or something like Weird, the Yao Yankovic story, where they just make everything a deliberate exaggeration. They change all the facts around. I think there is that levity to do something interesting, or guess The Wolf of Wall Street, where they retell history, but with so much comedy and satire added into it. But I'd say for conventional biopics, where you're just relating a period of the person's life, no, there's no advantages. It's a limited genre, like I've said before, because for the most part, 99% of the time, filmmakers limit themselves to the facts, and therefore you don't get anything more than reading a Wikipedia page.
I do think that with the Wikipedia page, it would be the same thing as seeing the films, but it would be even faster because you don't need to focus on a film for 2 hours when you could just spend 10-15 minutes reading the article. However, I think with the biopic, there is a more social environment. If you do see it with a group of people, you'll all learn something new together at the same time, and you can discuss it together afterwards. It's not the type of thing for a solo watcher like me, at least for the more serious films, but for quote-unquote normal people, I could see this being a good outing.
Fair enough. So wow, we're really just seeing biopics as the extension of homework here, or again, going back to documentaries and that tie there that you're watching this to learn. You're not really watching biopics for a cinematic, exciting experience. You're watching it to learn something. So yeah, not the best sell, but it kind of ties back to what at least both of you feel about biopics. Yeah, I think I do actually kind of agree with Sol here that conventional biopics, they probably don't really have that big thing that really stands out as an advantage. I think one thing I can think of, which is in terms of marketing, is which have a huge advantage in that they can always throw their star behind a brand. Again, it's a little bit like getting a new Spider-Man adaptation. Like you have in some cases you have built-in fan bases, right? You do a biopic about Natalie, you do a biopic about some famous historical figures. Like a lot of these just have fans and people interested in them who really wants to see it. So you have that fan base built in. Then you have that portion where people are going to discuss how historically accurate it is. And I think I don't really care that much for that part of the discourse, but that's quite huge on film forums sometimes. And even more in like media where like this character didn't behave like that, this part was altered, and the people have huge discussion about it. So I guess you get an inbuilt conversation around it as well. I think that one genuine strength that biopics have that they don't really use that often is to use lives to comment on the specific period they're in or the circumstances they're in, or to bring something back to current time, to be a little bit more meta, take more of a stance one way or another. But for the life of me, I can't think of any real big biopics that did that at the moment. So that point is pretty damn moot. So that will just tie me back to my earlier point that at least for classic Hollywood, sometimes the biopics just would have a little bit more intriguing characters or a little bit more unusual plotting, just because they had to at least get closer to the story that was actually there, and not like what was at the time the most conventional narrative boilerplate. But of course, biopics today have a really clear boilerplate of their own, and these films can all start feeling way too similar.
Yeah, it's just about the similarities you mentioned in the end. It's just the safest genre if you think about it. It is a genre that's guaranteed to win awards. Can't really expand on that. When you want that, just follow the formula, win your award, and that's it.
Well, awesome. Follow the formula and get your damn award. I think any listeners out there right now who are thinking about getting into filmmaking, yeah, maybe going into biopics is the proper route for you. So, all right then, let me try one last time. And this is my final question, so let's see if I can end this episode with any kind of positivity whatsoever. So, just after listening to all of us talk and share our preferences and share what we absolutely bloody hate, can you actually recommend any biopics to the other people here that you think they'd actually like?
It is a film I've mentioned before, but Better Man would be the closest to one that follows a biopic formula, but stands out enough that I think people with any opinion of the genre would like. So that would be my number one choice.
Yeah, I remember you booming on about Better Man time and time again, Arthur. So yeah, I actually have it now. I have it available. I just need to find the time to actually watch it. Hopefully I'll get back to you within a month or two and let you know how I felt.
I don't know if I've got any examples of biopics that you guys haven't seen that I would recommend. Most of them that I've got highly rated aren't really films that are biopics. So I think Arthur said he hadn't seen Weird the Al Yankovic Story, so I guess I would recommend that one just as an unconventional biopic. And I guess because Chris likes old, stuffy Hollywood biopics, I guess he should watch The Life of Emile Zola if he hasn't already. I've got nothing else to add.
Well, I mentioned Life of Emile Zola as one of the films I really like from classic Hollywood, so spot on, I guess. And ouch.
It's funny timing, actually, because I was going to see the Weird Al one last night, but my internet shut down, probably because of the storms, so kind of unfortunate.
Or opening you up to a fantastic recommendation from Saul. So yeah, I could see that working for you. I didn't love that movie, but it fits because it's kind of like Weird Al Yankovic told through like the sensibility of Weird Al Yankovic almost, which works really well. So I have a couple of thoughts on this one. I think for you, Arthur, just knowing a bit of what you're interested in and that you want something a little bit more different but still close to the formula. I think actually Raoul Peck's Young Karl Marx could be really interesting for you. It came out a few years ago, and it's a film that's essentially told entirely through dialogue. Like, it's just large conversations carrying us through his life. So I think that would actually be really, really interesting for you. I know that all of us have talked about how we really like unconventional, like surreal style biopics. So one big one that I love and which I consider an absolute masterpiece is Derek Jarman's biopic of Wittgenstein, which is just a surreal, crazy mess. You know, it has Tilda Swinton in it as well. Oh, of course, she's there. There's incredible tableaus, a lot of campy acting, like aliens are there. It's just, like, I think that anyone who, for instance, like 20th century might be really intrigued by that film as well. And just a more general one. I'm not sure if you guys like Hans-Jürgen Söderberg or how many of his films you've seen. I think most of you have probably seen Hitler, a film from Germany at least. But Karl May and Ludwig version King, like the other films in his German trilogy, those are weird, crazy, so creative. So definitely the kind of films that I think might be up your alley.
Yeah, that actually sounds quite interesting, and Wittgenstein and Karl Marx are people that I'm fascinated by, so yeah, I'll definitely look those up. Thanks.
I don't know why, but it's only just occurred to me. I only rated it an 8, and I didn't rate it a 9 or a 10 when I went through my IMDb stats, so maybe it's not listed as a biography, but in terms of the fact that they have things like Dog Day Afternoon, like a few hours of biographical film, then surely Dali from Quentin Dupieux, surely that counts as a biography. So I think that's another great example of a biographical film. We did cover it a lot in our Dupieux episode, so obviously go and give that a listen to for anybody who hasn't listened to the episode. But yeah, that's a really creative biopic, and there should be more biopics like that.
Oh my God, yes, I can't believe I forgot about Dali. So yes. Wow. Yeah, it counts. It's trying to capture Dali at so many points in his life. Yes, absolutely. And listen to our episode about Quentin Dupieux as well. It's the first film we discussed about him. And that made me think about the other Bob Dylan biopic from a few years ago as well, I'm Not There, which has longer segments, but also casts Bob Dylan by a number of different actors, ranging from Christian Bale to Kate Blanchett. To cover different parts of his life. And yeah, I thought that was absolutely wonderful as well. So yeah, when go out and you do something different with the formula and actually try to find a person, I think you can definitely enter some interesting territory.
Yes, I'd agree. I'm Not There is a much more interesting film than A Complete Unknown. And I guess I'm not surprised that A Complete Unknown did do better in the Oscar season because it's more conventional. But yeah, if you want to see a really unconventional, really interesting Dylan biopic, then I'd go for I'm Not There.
And with that, I finally hit my note of positivity to hand out to him. So I guess I'm Not There is unconventional enough for you guys to check out. And I hope some of the recommendations we threw out in this episode are worthwhile. If you have recommendations for us, please come to icmforum.com and share them, either for anyone who wants to listen, or for the individual hosts specifically. If you have a film and think, hey, I think Chris, Arthur, or Sol would love that documentary, let us know. And with that, thank you so much for listening. And have any biographies that you think Saul, Arthur, or I would absolutely love, let us know. And with that, thank you so much for listening, and join us again soon. You have been listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.
And in the next episode, we'll teach Chris to not say documentary when he means biography.